A small plane, 2 men, and a mission that was not only deadly, but also seems impossible today. The Las Vegas hotel owner's strange dream of keeping the airplane in the air for not just hours, not days, but months without touching the ground. Here, it wasn't just a matter of fuel. This is a story of lack of sleep, December's cold, and life. A delicate balance between keeping a balance and death. But the question is, were these 2 pilots really able to break this seemingly impossible record? Or did their plane disappear forever, somewhere in the blue sky? A strange event in history that is now lost in the books. The cheering spectators saw the Varna Bell in 1956. The famous man opened his own hotel in Las Vegas, which was quite different from other big casinos and hotels of the city, because simple rural people used to come here. This hotel, named Hacienda, was not so expensive, and that is why common people like to go here. But since the profit was very low, Bale kept thinking of new ideas to make his hotel famous. One day, an Army pilot friend of his named Bob Tim suggested to him that if a world record was broken, it could bring great fame to Hacienda. He suggested flying a plane that would fly for months, not days, without touching the ground. Bob liked this idea very much, but would it really bring fame to the hotel? Will it be able to do this or not? And most importantly, how will this be possible? Here it is important to understand that when the airplane was invented, its flight time was first recorded in seconds. It was important for the pilots and mechanics to know how long an airplane could fly in the air. With time, the planes became advanced, and their flight time too. And there came a time when the issue stopped at the fuel tank, i.e., the bigger the fuel tank, the longer the flight time. In 1923, this issue was resolved by the U.S. Army by refueling a plane mid-air from another plane. Just after that, the first record of endurance flight was broken immediately. The first world record was broken by a DA-4B plane in the air. He broke it by flying continuously for 37 hours after refueling 9 times. After that, a new series of breaking this world record started. America had caught the fever of endurance flight, and in 1929 alone, this record was broken 5 times. But by the time Bob Tim was giving this idea to Warren, the power of this world record had already been broken. Because now it was not about testing the limits of the engine or fuel tank of the plane, but about testing the physical limits of a human being. Bob Tim was talking about breaking a world record that was made in 1949 by 2 Navy pilots by keeping an airplane named Aaron's Sedan in the air for 46 days, and their objective was also highlighted a lot in the media. The owner of the hotel, Vernon Bailey, liked this idea of promoting the hotel and requested Bob Tim to complete this mission because, after all, Bob Tim was a famous World War II pilot. Tim first went to McCarran Field Airport and bought an Army 172 aircraft from there, and also hired a mechanic. To modify the plane for endurance flights, they first removed the co-pilot's seat, because if Tam was going to be in the air for more than a month, he would need a co-pilot. The 2 pilots would fly the plane in shifts, with one pilot handling the controls and the other sleeping on a farm pad in the co-pilot's seat. They also removed the back row benches, replacing them with just 8 square feet of storage to store essentials, and fitted a small sink in one corner of the cabin, so someone could occasionally take a sponge bath in the 4-foot-high cabin. They then installed a 995-gallon belly tank to apart from the wings of the plane. There is also an extra fuel tank. To fill the belly tank with fuel during the flight, an electric winch was also installed, which would be able to pull the fuel pipe up. They removed the co-pilot's door and replaced it with a folding door which would give easy access to the fuel port of the belly tank. Hanging from a flying plane may only be seen in the movies, but it was commonplace in those days. Even as late as the 1950s, aerial stuntmen performed many such scenes that involved jumping from one plane to another while flying. There was even a small folding platform outside the co-pilot's door to make refueling less dangerous. It was built so that one could stand on it and connect the pipe to the port of the belly tank, and this platform was the only place in the plane where one could stand upright. Otherwise, there could only be places to sit or lie down inside the Cessna 172. They also made a lot of changes in the engine of the plane and wrote big words "Hacienda Egg" on the outside of the plane, which that was the most important objective of this entire mission. Now, it was the turn to conduct test flights. Test flights began in the summer of 1958, but problems arose one after another. The co-pilot that Tim had hired earlier did not get along well with each other. During the test flights, the two would often disagree on one thing or the other. The test flight failed, the second one also failed, and in the third, both of them had such a fight that Tom fired the co-pilot from the job. The problem was in the exhaust valve of the engine, which was overheating repeatedly. They launched the mission thrice, but failed miserably. And on top of that, when he was trying to make a new world record, he failed to fly his test flight. At the same time, when the test flights were being done, Jim Heath and Bill Burka, two pilots named Jim Heath and Bill Burka, had already succeeded in setting a new world record by staying in the air for 50 days on the same SAM 172 aircraft. By December, all the issues of the aircraft were resolved, and finally, on 4th December 1958, officials of International Federation of Automobiles (FYA) were also present there. To avoid being accused of fraud by those monitoring the mission, Tim and his new co-pilot, John Cook, took off and returned to the runway so that a chase car could apply a special white paint to the plane's tires, so that if they tried to land stealthily, the white paint would peel off, and the world record would not count until 12 hours later, when the first flight took place. When the time for refueling came, both of them came on a predetermined road where a refueling truck was already present. As soon as the plane came in line with the road, the truck driver pressed the accelerator fully. At this time, the plane had to fly at its minimum speed, which was 100 kilometers per hour, because the truck could not go faster than this. The Hacienda came just 20 feet above the truck, and when the two were aligned, the co-pilot removed the winch and threw it down. The workers in the truck attached a pipe to the winch, and then the winch was pulled up. This pipe was connected to the port of the belly tank, and then the truck was signaled to turn on the fuel pump. For the next 3 minutes, the Hacienda. The egg and the truck were right next to each other, and if even a small mistake was made or the speed of either of them increased or decreased, the only result was death. When the belly tank got full, the co-pilot took out the pipe, threw it back down, and they flew in the sky again for the next 12 hours. If they had to break the world record of 50 days, they would have to follow the same process. This needs to be repeated at least 100 times. Tim and Cook flew over Las Vegas for a few days so that if there was a problem with the plane, the landing strip would be nearby. But when everything seemed fine, they started spending a lot of time over the wilderness of California. Fuel efficiency improves at higher altitudes, but the temperature also got below freezing, and modifications to the Honda's doors made the insulation not as good. So, to escape the cold, they decided to fly close to the ground. The views at low altitudes were good, but the mountains and clouds at night could be deadly. The two pilots had become good friends by staying together. In their free time, both of them used to read books, exercise, and chat. They took advantage of refueling twice a day to take away not only fuel, but also other essential items like water containers, engine oil, and food prepared by the chef of Hacienda. Here a question must be arising in your mind too, that the food which, where did he eat? Where did he go? Or where did he go to the toilet? He had a folding camp toilet seat on the plane, under which was a waste bag. He actually emptied this plastic bag full of waste over the wilderness of California. He never revealed this himself, but after the co-pilot died, his body was discovered. The wife had told them that Tim and Cook had already spent 36 days in the air. They even spent their New Year's Eve on the plane, but the effects of fatigue and tension were showing. They were feeling very cramped in the small plane cabin. They were not able to sleep properly because of the noise of the plane engine. One night, it so happened that Tim fell on the controls. He fell asleep while sitting, and this happened just a few minutes before the co-pilot's shift was to start. Surprisingly, Tim did not wake up for the next 1 hour, and the plane kept flying straight on autopilot. When Tim woke up, the plane was flying at a low altitude inside a canyon at an unknown place. If Tim had woken up for a few more minutes, he would have fallen asleep. Had it not opened, the plane would have hit a mountain, because the autopilot's responsibility was only to keep the plane straight, and not to protect it from obstacles. On January 12th, i.e., day 39, a serious problem occurred in the plane. The plane's generator failed, i.e., now the radio, lights, heater, and the system of pumping fuel from the belly tank into the wings stopped working. The ground crew sent up a small wind turbine, but it could only generate enough electricity to power the radios. The rest of the day, the fuel had to be pumped in manually by hand. The lack of lights made refueling at night very difficult, especially when there was a new moon. They solved this problem by tying a flashlight to the winch, so that the ground crew could see where to attach the pipe, and a second truck with a searchlight was driven 300 feet ahead of the refueling truck. As the day went on, the problems started getting worse. The plane's fuel gauge malfunctioned, the tachometer failed, and carbon began to accumulate in the engine as the time for breaking the record on January 23rd came closer. The Honda finally started getting the publicity its owner was looking for. Bailey scheduled flights over every major city in the country and published them in newspapers so people could see the plane and cover the historic moment. One time, he sent a plane full of photographers to fly alongside the Honda and take some photos. Could also click memorable pictures. To make this moment great, co-pilot Cook even got out of the plane and pretended to clean the windscreen. Newspapers published this picture, and the whole country started paying attention to this historic flight. On 23rd of January at 3:52 p.m., Hacienda broke the record made in 50 days. But no amount of hard work, and they faced many difficulties in breaking this record. Tim and Cook decided that they would not land just yet, and would keep flying as long as possible. And thus, they spent 14 more days in the air. Eventually, the plane was no longer capable of flying. On 7th February 1959, it was in the air for a total of 64 days, 22 hours, 19 minutes, and 5 seconds. 14:05. After waiting for some time, he finally asked the McCarran Field Control Tower for permission to land and landed the plane. At the time of landing, there was a huge gathering of press and people from all over the country who had come to the airport to see this historic moment. These included supporters, record officials, journalists, Tom's wife and children, and the entire staff of the Hacienda Hotel. Tim and Cook were in such bad shape that they were unable to get off the plane on their own. Officials also confirmed that the white tire paint was intact, meaning the plane did in fact stay in the air for 64 days without landing. In 2015, the FAI officially discontinued piloted endurance records because of the risk of loss of life. It kept growing itself, which means that this world record of Tim and Cook will now remain unbreakable forever. The Cessna 172, in which this world record was made, is hanging in the baggage claim area of McCarran International Airport's Terminal 1 and is still telling its story to people.